Hey, welcome back to the MMA Prospectus. I'm Zane Simon. I'm joined this week by Tom Grant. Patrick Wyman is out this week. I'd make a off joke about what he's doing, but it sounds like he's got some stuff to deal with. So I'm gonna throw that for throw him a curveball, and when he comes back, and leave him to sort things out in the meantime. Anyway, we've been gone for a couple weeks now. I was the one missing last week. Can't even remember why now. Oh,
You
that's
were
right. My car was in the shop.
absolutely by auto mechanics.
Yeah, what a shitty reason to miss a show for that.
How are you dealing with the Stockholm syndrome? Are you over it now?
Yeah, I've recovered more or less. And it's I still sometimes miss it, but you know, um, less said about that, the better. Um, we're here to talk this week. We're talking about UFC 186, which is not a terribly prospect heavy card, to be perfectly frank. And UFC on Fox 15, which Tom has not caught up on yet. So I'm just going to throw shit at him and see what he has to say about it. It's all hot takes all the way through. Yeah. Don't do that. Not allowed to do that. Um, and then we'll talk maybe about Kamaru Usman on The Ultimate Fighter because I'm a big Kamaru Usman fan. Nicholas Mata on Tough Brazil because we're big Nicholas Mata fans. And maybe a bit here and there about Absolute Combat Berkut 15, which was couple of weeks ago now, but kind of flew under our radar and had a whole bunch of guys that we've scouted pretty heavily on it. So it's kind of worth just taking a look at that and talking a bit about who's continuing to develop and all that. So I think to right off in, who are you most excited about on the prospect end of things for UFC 186? And keep in mind, you only have two real options.
Oh, and one of them is obviously Joe Riggs, right? I
One
mean,
of them is obviously Joe Riggs.
yeah. So I'm gonna. Pat's not here, but I'm gonna channel Pat. Uh, Thomas Almeida. I mean, he is just hands down the best prospect on this card. Incredibly violent striker, and getting him against Yves Jaboyne, who will be just tons of fun. It's a really nice piece of matchmaking to, I think, kind of test Almeida against the guy who is very comfortable standing and in kind of all phases, but who's not going to be intimidated by a young hot shit striker kind of coming up. And I think that's going to be an awesome fight. There's a reason it's the curtain jerker for the pay per view. I'm really glad this one's on pay per view. I think they are obviously seeing the potential Almeida has to, if nothing else, be a really exciting fighter for that division.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of seeing really good young talent against aging talent that's not dangerous and guys that are like past their prime and not dangerous just because but who are still like not totally shot. I don't think Jabouin is totally shot, but he's a fighter who can challenge Almeida everywhere, but is not likely to, even if he won, is not likely to hurt him. It's a great stepping stone kind of fight for Almeida to, it's somebody that's going to make him work, but that he can still show off a bit against and should be able to look good against a name that people recognize.
Yeah, no, it should be. I mean, Almeida's just got such clean, like everything about his striking is just so clean. And he's so comfortable in that kind of mid range where a lot of young fighters aren't comfortable, like in the pocket. Most fighters are really comfortable kind of playing that in and out game. Very few of them are confident enough to kind of stand in the pocket and trade with guys. And the guys who do tend to be more of like the roughneck brawler types. They don't tend to be like this clean technical type. And I'm just every time he gets in the cage at this point, I'm excited to see him.
Well, I mean, it's kind of become a model for some of our, a lot of the recent champs we're seeing are more guys who are willing to stand in the pocket and trade, or who can move well enough in the pocket that they make it a real challenge. I mean, even guys like TJ Dillashaw and Mighty Mouse are both, while they'll dart in and out from range, they're both willing to get in and throw three or four punches and stand in with guys. But otherwise, obviously Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks are both that kind of fighter. Chris Weidman is that kind of fighter. And to this point, John Jones has become that kind of fighter. He's really willing to stand in, and especially if he can get his hands on you, just clinch up and maul you inside in the clinch.
I think that's kind of the culmination of like the current dominant metagame at the high levels of MMA, where it's obviously we're in a big swing towards striking. All the top fighters are really like their striking is hitting levels that we've never seen in MMA. And that mid-range in the pocket is where the majority of fighters are least comfortable. So it stands to reason that the cutting edge fighters at the top are going to force the fight into that range, because that is where they're comfortable there. And I think anyone who started striking can understand it, an utter discomfort of kind of standing there knowing you can get hit and not wanting to just take a step back out of range. It takes some fortitude to kind of stand there and just trust in your defensive technique, and not try to open up distance and play the distance game, because it's very comfortable playing distance game. That's a comfortable way. It's why we saw so many MMA strikers in the early days play way too far outside, and now we're kind of seeing a correction for that.
No, it's true. We've even a lot of very, very good MMA fighters have been in and out. MMA strikers have been in and out guys. You could even say that Anderson Silva was largely, he was either all the way in the clinch, linked up with you, or he was on the outside waiting to jump in and land one hard shot or counter you as you came in. GSP was notoriously not a comfortable in mid-range striker. Like, he would throw one or two jabs, one or two shots, and then he'd be back on the outside, looking to pepper you with the jab, looking for kicks, and then looking to drive in with the double leg and take you down. So it is definitely it's definitely an evolution that we're seeing to more guys who are willing to just stay in the pocket and sit on their punches. And Almeida is very much in that style. A guy who's not on the card, and who is on the card, and he's our other big prospect on the card, who's not yet, I would say, the most comfortable mid-range striker. He's getting there, but it's taking time, is Kyoji Horiguchi. And, he's definitely much more on the sort of classic in and out striker style for MMA. And I say classic for a broken rhythm karate fighter that's very little like what we typically see. But he's the other real blue chipper on this card.
Yeah, and I think that kind of in and outness is more born of his karate style. Pretty much everyone who has watched enough MMA kind of understands that the karate philosophy emphasizes a lot of movement and a lot of playing with distance, and having distance be your first line of defense. There's a lot of talk about Horiguchi and should he be in this fight, and is this fight a disservice to him? And it's just so tough in the flyweight division because, short of, one sec, I'm blanking on a name here.
McCall.
Yeah, short of putting Dodson back in there. They're really short on guys to fight Demetrius Johnson. And for Horiguchi, it's both likely too soon, but also, it's not like he's it's not like he's still completely green. Guy's been fighting for about 5 years at this point. He's in that range where we kind of stop considering a guy to be a prospect and start considering him to be in the meat of his career. Mm-hmm. Now, he's only been in the UFC for a little bit. He has yet to face like a fighter on the level of Demetrius Johnson. So he's going to get a really hard, it's a really tough learning curve, what he's going through right now. But I'd be hard pressed to kind of say that this is an utter injustice the way some people have made it out to be.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to me, is that we should really, Horiguchi should be about ready to take a big step up. Now, what I would like to see for that big step up is somebody like, and now I'm doing it, but God damn it, John Moraga. Somebody who is dangerous, who has been a top flyweight for a little while now. I think even much better top flyweight than I originally gave him credit for. Who's already been in a title fight, who is a tough fighter to beat, but isn't just going to go out there and potentially stomp Horiguchi. So that's the kind of step I'd more like to see for somebody in Horiguchi's position. But at the same time, like, he's a good fighter in the middle of his career, even if he's only 24. And I don't think he's unready as people want to believe he is.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, this gets back to the idea that we've kind of talked about, is that we feel like people in the MMA sphere tend to look at age a little too much and not fighting career. Like, how long has the guy been fighting professionally? Because there's some 24-year-olds who are arguably approaching the downside of their career because they've been fighting since they were 15.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things not to bring us too heavily back to last week yet. I will get into that more. But that's one of the things that I keep having to drum away with Max Holloway. And, like, his win over Cub Swanson was huge, but Max Holloway is almost at the point in his career where those are the fights that he should be able to take. Like, he's been fighting. He's only 23, but he's been fighting for 5 years. He's continued to improve regularly over those 5 years. He should be ready to step up and face top level fighters.
Yeah. And it's something that I think when we're scouting, you and I look at, when we see a guy who's a prospect who's 5 or 6 years into his career, we're expecting to see a guy that's pretty refined at that point. If the guy still looks pretty raw at 5 or 6 years into his career, that's not a good sign. That's usually a sign that guy's probably not going to be. I mean, he may make it to the UFC, but he's not likely going to be like a top 10 fighter. There are exceptions, obviously, but I mean, for the most part, you want a 5-year veteran to look like he could start competing with top 15 guys, his next fight.
Yeah. Which, to bring us back to some of the other fighters on this UFC 186 card before we swerve away, there's one other talent. Actually, I should say there's one other talent that I would consider to be a pretty blue chip talent on this, and that's Randa Marcos. She's really the other fighter on this who has a chance to climb fairly quickly in her division and is really a top athlete coming up. I kind of feel like, this is probably going to be a repeat of the Felice Herrig versus Paige Van Zandt fight we saw last week, where Herrig was a little more technical everywhere, and certainly, and like very scrappy on the ground, very dangerous on the ground, but eventually it's just like the more athletic fighter just wins out everywhere.
Yeah, I think athleticism, the importance of athleticism in women's MMA really can't be overstated. Just simply because in men's MMA, we have a much longer period of time for athletes to have kind of developed, and we have a greater talent pool in that side of the sport. So you're getting athletes with a deeper well of technique, a more tested metagame over there. And in women's MMA, there is that upper crust, but man, after that upper crust, there's a big drop off, and athleticism alone can stamp your ticket into that upper crust. And the Paige Van Zandt fight, which I wasn't able to watch in its entirety, but I've seen bits and pieces of it, kind of makes that point where, I mean, like, Van Zandt's a really good athlete. People were really on her for, like, obviously all the deals and kind of the way the promotion got behind her before she really has been tested. But in that side of the sport, if you're a great athlete, you're going to go pretty far. Now, obviously, there's ceilings for people who are, I don't want to say just athletes, but rely more on athleticism than technical skill. But man, you can make a career out of on that side of the sport right now with just being a better athlete than everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of been a career criticism of Chris Cyborg that's basically been her career. I think, she's a little better striker than that, but that still, she's also obviously far and away been a better athlete than everyone she's fought.
I think that's why the steroid test was so damaging to her.
Yeah.
Was because people just perceive her as being, well, the reason she wins is because she's so much stronger and so much bigger and so much more physically dominant. I think there's more to her game than that. But I think that's why the positive steroid test has been so damaging to her, is because in a lot of fans' perceptions, she's a fighter that a lot of fans can say, look, it was all steroids.
Yeah, and I don't buy that, but I think it's still, steroids or no, I think she's a good example of just how much being a dominant athlete can get you in the
Yeah.
sport. Even if we're saying her game is more technical than that, there are more parts and all that. It's like, yeah, but she's still like, or even, and yeah, it's just like that's the reason that Ronda Rousey is like on the, how many seconds can I beat my next opponent in track, is because she's a very good athlete among a sea of mediocre ones.
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to having she has an elite skill set in something. She's a fantastic athlete, and no one can match her in either. No one has a skill set to match her, and no one has the athleticism to match her. So it's, 14 seconds. I guess my next fight I need to win in 12.
Yeah. A brief shout out to Olivier Aubin Mercier. I'm actually interested to see how his fight with David Michaud looks. I think Aubin Mercier is a pretty great athlete too. The UFC kind of plucked up as a really raw talent. He started fighting in late 2011, was on The Ultimate Fighter by late 2013, just after 4 pro fights, and made it to the final of the show, lost the finale, but he's got the athletic tools that I expect to see him develop really well in the UFC.
Yeah, no, good athlete, strong judo background, really nice trips. Like this guy's fun to watch in terms of just like the takedown game he brings to the table. It's a little bit different than your standard North American folk style wrestler sort of set. So it's pretty. I'm going to be interested to see how he does against kind of a solid wrestler.
Yeah. Other than that, there's really, Barberena, Laprise. They're both guys that can be solid kind of action fighters, or especially Laprise is sort of, he feels like he has gatekeeper stamped on him from day one. And Shane Campbell too, they picked up, but he's really he's one of those guys who has been fighting since 2008, just not that much. And he's the kind of fighter that, as we talked about, for somebody he's got a well-developed skill set, but I don't expect to see a lot of growth out of him further in the UFC. He's an action fighter that should be a fun action fighter for a couple of years, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some brutal stuff on this card.
Yeah. On that note, though, we should take a look back at last week, because there was a whole bunch of good shit. We've already talked a little bit about Max Holloway and Paige Van Zandt and how awesome both of them were. Big fighter that we really got to spend some time on, because I was really reluctant to pick him, was Aljamain Sterling. And he was fantastic. Just dominated Takeya Mizugaki from bell to bell. Subbed him out in the third, and showed exactly what you'd hope to against a fighter who is incredibly predictable in Mizugaki.
Yeah, I mean, Mizugaki's not an easy guy to, even as predictable as he is, it's very hard to, beat this guy. He's really difficult to finish. Sterling is a top level prospect, great athlete, technical fighter. I really think that he's in the right camp. I think that Sarah Longo. Wow, that was, yeah. So I think the Sarah Longo camp. I think I've said it before. If you gave me that super athlete that wanted to just get into MMA, Sarah Longo is one of the top camps. I would just drop that dude in, because I think they do things very much the right way there. It's a very tight knit team. Really, really good coaching. Lots of good sparring partners, very positive overall attitude, connections to really good regional MMA to build you up, which is really important.
Yeah.
And Sterling's coming up the right way. Mitsugaki's, if you go down the list of guys he's fought and guys who finished him, it takes till you got to go down to 2007 before he's lost to a dude that hasn't been a top 10 fighter. So I think Sterling, this is a fight that is on my must watch list, but when you hear a guy like that, like Sterling, just clean Mitsugaki's clock. It's not super shocking, and it just portends that he's probably ready to just about take off.
Yeah, I mean it's what you hope. Like I say, it's he's a very hard fighter to beat. He's a classic sprawl and brawl. Even has integrated some offensive wrestling when he needs it, and is a very comfortable mid-range boxer. Very good in the pocket, and that's what he is. Like that he wants to get in the pocket and box with you, trade combinations. He's really comfortable hanging out there, and it's up to you to throw off that part of his game. Because if you break that part of Mizugaki's game down, you can break him down, and that's what Aljamain Sterling did beautifully. He just kept Mizugaki scrambling, kept his back against the fence, kept him working, got him on the ground, kept him fighting off submissions all fight, and worked him over that way. And that's exactly the right way to fight that fight. The other fighter then that we should talk about up front and front and center is Beneil Dariush, who beat Jim Miller. And I'd say this was a good matchup for Dariush. I think I picked him to win. A lot of people who really, do a lot of fight analysis pre-fight were picking him to win because Miller did match up just right with him, but it was still a great win to highlight how quickly Dariush is rising up that division at lightweight.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I feel like Jim Miller, like people remember him for his 2010, 2011 run when he was a lightweight contender. But really since the Benson Henderson loss, he's kind of been that top level gatekeeper for the lightweight division. Guys who are getting title shots have to go through Jim Miller. And the fact that Beneil Dariush is able to kind of handle him the way that he did is just it's a sign of a guy who's broken through, and sadly it might be the last time we talk about Beneil Dariush as a prospect, because you beat Jim Miller. I mean, you're getting in there with some top dudes next time.
Yeah, and he's been fighting since 2009, so it's weird that he hasn't fought a lot and he hasn't fought consistently. But now that his career is really kind of kicking into gear, it feels like everything is gelling just at the time it should be. In some ways, it feels like he's sort of a prodigy talent, where he came into the UFC a year and a half ago, fought 6 times, has won 5 of those fights, and has just been rising all the way through. But he's also getting to the point where logically he should be getting ready to kind of peak and get his whole game working.
Yeah, and it's just, man, it's really interesting now, just because I still we're talking about 2014 when he was about a year ago when he lost to Ranji Nijam, and now he's clearly progressed so much since then. So yeah. I think a nice aggressive striker would be the last thing he really needs to get in there with.
Yeah, that he needs to fight one of the top 15 strikers. Even Bobby Green would kind of fit that mold, but otherwise, an Edson Barboza or even Dustin Poirier, maybe somebody like that.
I think Poirier might be a good match for him, but I think maybe a little further up the ladder considering what Dariush has been doing recently. But I feel like that's the last test for him. If he can pass that test, then title contention is right in this guy's future.
Yeah, and it's in some ways it kind of lays a blueprint for other fighters who are looking to how do you build a career successfully in the UFC quickly, and the way you do it is you fight a lot, basically. I mean, if you can win fights, you fight as often as you can, because even taking a loss to Ramsey Nijam, Dariush was back in just 3 or 4 months later, and then another 2 months after that, and then a few months after that, and then another couple months, and just staying on it, getting as many fights as you can, and you put together a win streak, and if you can do it quickly, suddenly you're going to be right at the top of the division.
It speaks to the benefits of smart training too, that in our current state of MMA, injuries are just a fact of life, and some camps are really kind of figuring out we're still in a phase where we're learning how to train MMA. Everyone's still trying to figure it out. And King's MMA is one of those camps where they've not been having a lot of injuries, and their guys are able to get back in there. And if you're able to keep your name out there and pile up a couple of wins, it wipes out the memory of losses, even fairly recent losses, very effectively. So I think kind of keeping fighters healthy, obviously for their career and like their body is important, but also just for like their actual progression up the ladder is becoming more and more important.
So on the downside of prospects from UFC on Fox 15, this card also saw the set like this is sort of like the continued terror of the light heavyweight division that we have zero guys on the rise, and both Patrick Cummins and Corey Anderson were delivered bad blows. Cummins is less that's less bad because OSP is very obviously a top 5, top 6 guy right now.
Mhm.
He's very obviously in the top 10, really solid light heavyweight, powerful athlete. But Corey Anderson losing to John Vellante, that's rough.
Yeah. Um, that's a fight that I haven't seen, and I'm not sure if I really want to go back and watch because I've seen enough. I've seen a lot of bad light heavyweight fight prospect sort of things, but I mean Corey Anderson is just we have some athletes coming up. It's just they're all so raw, and it's I think drawing equivalents to like Oven St. Preux was just something we did a lot in when we were scouting light heavyweight. Like, well, he's a really good athlete, but it's going to be a long road because he's going to have to learn how to fight.
Yeah, and I will say this for Corey Anderson, his boxing was 100 times better than it has been at any point in his career. He actually
Yeah.
looked like a competent and capable boxer for most of this fight. It's just that it came at a massive detriment to his leg kick checking.
Yeah.
He was not prepared to check kicks at all out of his new boxing stance and with his new boxing tools. And he got so concerned about the leg kick that he never saw a big right hand coming late in the fight.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I would say for this, the biggest takeaway that you can have about the light heavyweight division is that it hasn't changed that much in the last like 5 years. And I mean, if we were scouting, like if Oven St. Preux was in his first like 7 fights as a prospect right now, and he would not have shown up on our radar. Because I mean, we're talking like from 2008 to like the end of 2009, he went 3-4
Yeah.
in the I mean, like it's going to be athletes who just have to figure it out, or it's going to be athletes that come out like John Jones and inside 3 months are in the UFC. That's going to be the light heavyweight division. It's going to be either the long haul guys that it takes them an extra 2 years to develop over another weight class, or it's going to be guys that just explode onto the scene.
Yeah, it should be noted for Anderson when judging Anderson's loss to John Vellante that OSP lost to Virgil Zwicker by knockout, in the first 7 fights of his career.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen Virgil Zwicker fight, like you would not then turn around and peg OSP as a future top 5, top 6 light heavyweight in the world.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, it's not a great sign that the elite athletes in like the guys who can go play any sport, those heavyweights and light heavyweights, and they're clearly not coming to MMA right now.
or when they are, they're coming in late in the game. Like they're guys who are like already almost 30, and then they're coming in and saying, "Okay, I'm going to try an MMA career," and then they've got a really long road to building up to being somebody.
Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, things to talk about from last week. Eddie Gordon put forth a performance that I don't want to talk about against Chris Dempsey, and
I would say the one that blew up my timeline when it happened was Max Holloway beating the snot out of Cub Swanson.
yeah, that was glorious. That was one of the performances, and this is, like I said, Max Holloway is kind of at the end of the point that we would think of him as a prospect, even, but he's really shown what, when you look at a kid who is coming in with one skill that he's really working on and building the rest of his game around that skill. like Holloway's done a perfect job supporting his primary skills with secondary skills.
Hmm.
He now has some kind of takedown game. He has a submission offense. He has a takedown defense, and it all perfectly and even a kicking game, and it all perfectly supplements his boxing. And that's still like the core of how he fights. But everything else now is just right there to cushion it and buoy it and keep that up.
Yeah, and having a focused game is not a bad thing. I mean, it's something that like we went through that phase where it was kind of like we thought that the next generation of MMA fighters, like, man, they're going to be good at everything. Like they're going to be amazing wrestlers and amazing boxers and fantastic submission grapplers. And then it kind of like, no, I mean, like even inside like individual sports, like inside boxing, the top boxers are not awesome at every aspect of boxing. And like inside grappling, like you have guard players and top players, and elite due to like there's a part of their game that isn't as good as the rest of the part of their game. Having a focused game is part of a competition mindset, and the fact that Max Holloway came into the sport and built himself like a focused MMA game is one of the reasons why he's succeeding so quickly. I mean, he had his growing pains. He had Conor McGregor take him down and just kind of grind him out with a busted knee, if I recall correctly. And he had Dustin Poirier just make him look absolutely silly, like back when Holloway was a white belt. But now it's kind of coming. He's got the other aspects of his game where he can funnel everything right back to his boxing.
Yeah, well, and the nice thing about that is that when, if you can develop things around a specific skill, then suddenly it becomes less important how good those things are, because it's like, well, people are so desperate not to deal with your boxing, they're not really going to pay as much attention to like, suddenly it's like, oh shit, you're taking me down. Oh shit, you're submitting me because I'm so worried about this one aspect of your game that you're really going to hurt me with, that I'm not ready for the other parts of it. And that's, I think, what you tend to see. Very few fighters are going to beat Demetrius Johnson. Like, he's the guy that's all areas are equally amazing. But, even like, I don't know, even, it's like Anthony Pettis, where everything, the striking was so great against Gil Melendez and so on point that Melendez is finally like, okay, I'll take him down. And suddenly it's like, okay, you're subbing me out. That's the end of the fight.
Yeah, and building those side skills is absolutely vital. I mean, like you can't succeed long term in MMA without doing so. And I think we got a glimpse into that actually today with the whole Ben Askren thing. Where, yeah, like who it was Sapo. Sapo was controlling the distance on him and just doing a really good job of maintaining distance and not letting Askren get into the range that he usually likes to shoot in for a takedown. And like Askren's entire game just evaporated for a little bit there.
Yeah, no, it's even if you have a very one-dimensional game, people are gonna especially when everybody's focused on beating you. Like anybody who's going in to fight in ONE FC in welterweight is focusing on like, how do I beat Ben Askren? How do I beat Ben Askren? And if your game is as one-dimensional as Askren's has been, like people are gonna start to try and they're gonna start to get there, and it's not. You could even say we sort of saw the same thing with Anderson Silva, like against first Chael Sonnen and then eventually Chris Weidman. But it's just like when everybody is building to try and how do I defeat you, people are gonna find the cracks.
Yeah, especially if your game stops growing. I mean, like the biggest growth that Askren's game has made in the last couple of years has been that like he's upped the volume of striking on the ground. Like every advance he made was like after he took guys down to help him finish fights. And we never really saw that much new from him on the feet. And now everyone's been gearing themselves to stop. Anyone who's fighting him is devoting all their energies to not get taken down. And he fought a guy who played like a very modern anti-wrestler game with a lot of circling, some good angles, some good distance. And anytime he gets anywhere near you, disengage. And if he gets a hold of you, either establish room for a knee or go for some sort of counter. And yeah, Askren seemed totally put out, like thrown off by it.
Yeah. So on that note too, like getting out of the UFC a little, recently there was a Absolute Championship Berkut event, ACB 15. Um, and this flew under the lot of kind of the radar for me, especially, which is why I kind of want to talk about it. But all the videos are available on YouTube. I have yet to watch it all, but there were a bunch of guys we scouted on there. All of them did well. I'm very proud. Um, Anatoly Takov fought Maxim Shvets, who's actually somebody we scouted as part of the middleweight scouting report, and this was a welterweight fight. Takov won by guillotine. Abdurrahman Tamarov, one of our top featherweight prospects, won a fight. Uh, Edward Vartanian won. He won against a guy we looked at, Jamal Magomedov. I don't know if you remember him, but he fought in Cage Warriors a couple times.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm trying to think who was there was. I feel like there was someone else, but those may have been the main ones.
Yeah, Termenov, Rotarian, and Tok. Yeah, I think that's just about everyone. I mean, the ACB's been really coming up, and they've been putting on some really fantastic shows in Russia, and they've been pulling a lot of top talent out of Chechnya. They become like a real like source of talent.
Yeah,
Um,
I think part of it's what like M1 Global is, they're the big top organization over there, but they're not necessarily getting getting fighters from every corner of Russia. They're getting a lot of Russians, and then they'll pull in a lot of Europeans just from like across Europe. They're starting to pull in more Germans and, you
the,
know,
the, I feel like M1's trying to become more of a hub promotion.
yeah,
And like what Cage Warriors used to be, where like they pulled like all the northern and western European fighters into like one promotion. I feel like M1 is trying to rise to the challenge that KSW is providing, and I feel like we're going to see them try to battle it out to be the promotion of Eastern Europe. And in the meantime, ACB will prosper being like the regional Russian show. Then,
yeah. I expect it's like ACB, Tech Crep, and even potentially Oplot
yeah,
are like
and
the promotions that are really going to benefit from M1 broadening their focus, because then they get to focus, ACB especially, like they focus on Chechnya and uh, Dagestan and some of those Caucasus areas.
yeah.
They get, you get some, like I say, this is a fight card with three guys that we think of as real top potential talents on it.
I feel like fight nights also might benefit from that because they put on like there's a couple of shows in Russia that are, despite how small they are, have like surprisingly good production
Yeah.
in terms of like the in-house production they do. It's just really like the video boards they have and like the intros they do. It's just surprisingly good for like in the U.S. when you get dudes and they're fighting in a gym.
Yeah, it's true. It's a much cleaner product often. Much more pleasant to watch. Oh, I think Oplot's probably the biggest question of those, just because they've had some trouble being at first a Ukrainian-based promotion that kind of got moved to
Oh,
Russia.
oh, I just realized who our other guy on this card was. Our number two was it middleweight? The one we just did. Yeah, our number two middleweight fought on this card.
Oh, oh yeah,
Yeah.
damn it. That of course, Ramazan Janaev
Yeah. Well, you see, it's
or Rahman Janaev.
yeah. Well, we just did the division. We haven't spent quite as much time staring at his name as we have as the other ones.
It's true. It's true. I feel bad about that, but yeah, Janaev fought on this card too, and he's an amazing talent. So
Yeah.
you know, I'm especially excited to see what it looks like. Him going and winning a decision looks like, because
Yeah.
that's a big deal for somebody who's been as violent a finisher as he is. It's good to see what he would look like over the long haul, and he fought, a good, well-tested vet in Alexei Efremov.
Yeah. Seeing what he looks like in the third round will be interesting.
Um, Also, recently, something of note is the Ultimate Fighter has Tough 21 has started up, Black Zillions versus ATT, and there's several guys that we scouted on that season. Most notably, or at least two, most notably Steve Montgomery and Kamaru Usman. And Usman has already fought and won his first round opening bout, which I'm very excited about because honestly, if you're going to be on The Ultimate Fighter, and I don't necessarily like to see young talent on The Ultimate Fighter, I really think it's a better, I think it's really a best avenue for guys that would never be in the UFC otherwise, who've just never put together that regional record, but have a lot of either skill or athleticism that's just never quite gelled. Like those are the guys I really want to see on Tough. But if you're going to be on there, you got to get past the first round. You got
Yeah,
to.
yeah, I tend to agree with you with young fighters being on there because I've just been yeah, it's been a crazy week for me, and I didn't watch the show live, so I kind of asked how he did, and a Twitter follower of mine kind of said that he won, but like he didn't look that good, and then he said, but that's what Tough's for, making good fighters look terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, like that kind of sums it up. And from the highlights I saw, it looks like Usman got touched up on the feet a little bit, like a lot of 50-50 exchanges and things like
Yeah.
that. But when it came to the wrestling, I mean, he just touched the dude and he fell over, which is kind of what Usman does. I mean, like his wrestling is pretty top notch and really strong athlete. And once he gets kind of all things firing on all cylinders, he could be a pretty big force in the division.
Well, and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy he faced, Michael Graves. Graves, I watched some tape on him, and he's one of those guys that struck me watching tape as like he's probably not going to do well in the show, but he's going to be a really tough fighter to face because he's strong, he's athletic, he's tough, and he's just really wildly aggressive. Just one of those guys that's just always throwing everything at you, may not be technical anywhere, but is aggressive everywhere. So I'm not at all surprised that that ended up being a tougher than expected fight for Usman.
Yeah, at one point that guy had a pretty nice like back take just off like
Yeah.
a snap instant moment, like jumped on Usman's back. And he didn't really come close to finishing the choke. The choke was never like in. And yeah, you can finish like a face crank or something like that from that position, but not a lot of professional fighters are tap into that. So I mean, it looked like a pretty solid performance for Usman, who I think in I think his style is both perfect for the show and terrible for the show because he's going to do kind of like the Jesse Taylor and just run through the house and just grapple the crap out of everybody and just not be exciting at all when he does it. But just no one's he there's I don't think there's anyone in that house he can't hold down for 2 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like the Rashad Evans kind of thing where he won the Ultimate Fighter and nobody was like very excited about Rashad Evans coming off the Ultimate Fighter, you know?
Yeah,
Like he was winning a split decision over Brad Imes, a split decision over Sam Hogar, a majority decision over Stephan Bonner. That was sort of the legacy of Rashad Evans' early UFC career. And then suddenly he kind of put everything together and went on a run to the title.
yeah. I think that's and being a Black Zillion and working with Rashad, I think that's a nice parallel for him. And I just always like the season with Jesse Taylor always served as a lesson to me that like, if there's ever like a dominating wrestler in the tough house, that's the dude that's probably gonna win. Because I remember that season was kind of weird and there was a lot of like, you know, there was some talent there that kind of seemed like it would be better than it would be, and that Jesse Taylor just like ran roughshod over him.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, it's a perfect style for that kind of thing because it's usually for guys who have come up being great wrestlers. They have a really deep technical base there to draw on, a much deeper one often than guys who are coming up as strikers, maybe even guys who are coming up as grapplers and maybe started grappling, doing BJJ in their 20s. Um, and they are, wrestlers often was like, oh, I've been wrestling since I was 6.
Yeah,
And they're much better at cutting weight, and it's just the house environment of doing a bunch of weight cuts, winning a bunch of fights really quickly is just very much like what they're used to.
Yeah. And was that the season with Rolly Delgado on it?
I don't know.
No, no, that was a different one. I was thinking of Tough, and I remember. Obviously, I'm all in the grappling scene, and they're going to do the Combat Wrestling World Championships, and Rolly Delgado made the U.S. team, which was kind of random.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. Tough's its own thing, which is why I don't like to see young talent on it. But
Yeah. I, for the most part, don't watch the show anymore and just wait till the finale because what you're seeing on the show isn't really professional MMA. It's a weird, it really honestly is just a weird version of amateur MMA that like is its own thing. And being good at that doesn't necessarily mean, and we've talked about this before, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at professional MMA in the UFC.
yeah, it definitely, we get guys like Mike Ricci where it's just like win out in two, you know?
Well, I mean, he was highly touted before he went in there. I mean, there were a lot of people that thought Mike Ricci was going to do something, and I mean, I think that was more reflective of like the fact that there were very few people actually looking at prospects back then, and you just kind of like counted on promotions and camps telling you who was going to be good.
Yeah, that could be too. I'll admit that I wasn't scouting at the time, so I just remember people kind of, Ricci coming off the show, like he didn't have any hype because everybody who'd watched him fight knew what they were getting, but it was sort of this example that you can run through the show and then immediately suck afterward. Um, Anyway, also on that note, we've had Tough Brazil was recently, has been going recently, and it's actually, it's not something I think a lot of people are watching because it's Tough Brazil and Tough's hard enough to watch without having really bad subtitles to go with it. But one of our scouted fighters was on it. One of our top featherweight prospects, Nicholas Mata, who I am happy to say made it in the house, and I'm still waiting to see how he's going to do there. He hasn't fought yet, but it's this tough season seems like they really picked up a lot of good fighters, so I'm hoping he does well.
Yeah, I watched his first fight, the fight he got into the house, and I'm trying to remember who he fought. It was Korea, right?
No, that
No.
Korea was the guy who knocked get somebody out with a wheel kick.
Oh yeah. Yeah, who did he fight to get into the house? But in
I don't
any
know.
event, it
Nobody
was
would know.
it was a Moda fight. I mean, like he got in there and he was violent.
Hmm.
And yeah, I agree with you. Making it into the house is the biggest jump. We've seen good fighters falter in that kind of first fight with like all the pressure and it only being 2 rounds, and so he's in the house, and hopefully he makes enough of an impression that he hangs around in the UFC and gets a shot in real MMA with the UFC.
Yeah, that's definitely, that's our hope. Like I say, I think more than anything else with Tough, it's sort of a not necessarily something to watch unless you really love the Tough format, but I always follow it just because I want to see who's going to come out of it and actually go on to some success and be a good fighter for the UFC, whether they did well on the show or not.
Yeah. And I yeah, for the most part, just kind of my weekly schedule. I tend to just wait for that. I tend to wait for the finale, but if there's something going on, I'll jump on Fight Pass and try to find an episode. But for the most part, I mean, I think I think as a format, it's just done. Like, I mean, can we agree that the early 2000s style reality show they build around it just needs to go?
Yeah, I think the biggest proof of that is really that in a season that is probably got a better format and better talent than they've had in 5 years, it's still not something I want to watch anymore. Like
Yeah.
the gym versus gym thing, I love it. I think that's great. The talent they've got on Tough 21, I think that's great. I have no interest in watching the show at all.
Would it be? I mean, would it be better if they just made it like a Fight Pass fight card? They did like a couple things of like building it up, and then they just did they ran down a bunch of fights of like ATT versus Black Zillions in like one card.
I guess I don't know. I really like. I can't think of anything that could have the Ultimate Fighter stamped on it that I would want to watch at this point.
Yeah,
You know, that's I think the problem is that it's the brand name itself that now is just like inspires me to want to get away. Um, just one last thing, really quick, because I don't think we talked about it sort of in reflection at all. Is just to give a quick once over of brief some good performances to think about from Gonzaga Krokop back in Poland. Really, there were of the real prospects on that card. There were four fighters that really performed either at or well above expectations. At expectations, I would say personally would be um, Taylor Lapilus and Leon Edwards. Both fought about as well as I would hope, their um, given their competition and coming in. Lapilus looked fantastic. His striking was on point all fight. He looked like a real fighter that the UFC could build out of France. And then Edwards just demolished Bashinsky, which is something I've been waiting to see from Edwards because he has the kind of talent to do that to people.
yeah, yeah. I think, man, that card was rough, and I think it really speaks to the fact that when the UFC went there, they did not get a lot of good Polish fighters for this card, and it showed. I mean, this is a case in point of them rolling into a market and thinking that they were going to sell with the brand, and they did. I mean, there are some good Polish fighters out there, and that we've looked at and talked about, and none of them were fighting for the UFC that weekend.
Yeah, it's true. I'm not sure why that is, but you know, so they didn't get the best Polish fighters. I still want to focus, like, there's some people still did well. They weren't
Yeah, no,
Polish. None of
you're
them
right.
were Polish,
Mm-hmm.
but the two that really exceeded expectations, then, if Lapilus and Edwards met expectations, were good fighters expected to be good on the day. Alexandra Albu and Marina Moros were like way, way above expectations. I
Yeah,
don't know if you caught either of those fights, but um, they both just blew away their competition. Especially surprising of Moros considering she's fighting Joanne Calderwood.
yeah. That armbar from the guard was really nice, but it also speaks to the fact that, like, how often do you see, like, throwing up an armbar on a guard? I mean, that it suggests some work to do for Calderwood, also. Um, But yeah, as we're reaching back, also I think number three, like, middleweight, Khalil Roundtree put in some work on RFA a couple weekends ago too. Beat the snot out of Cameron Olson um, over 3 rounds. So yeah, it was a really prospect heavy month. It ended up being that, like, not on big shows, but like lots of regional action this month. And I'm seeing something here. Yes, Chris Camozzi has just tapped out to Jacare Souza again. It's crazy.
I think on that note, we officially have nothing else to talk about. So that now that Tom's killed the show, you can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find us both at Bloody Elbow. Um, give us a like if you're watching us on YouTube. That's the thumbs up button. It looks like that. And subscribe to MMANation.com because that's how you find out about all this shit and get to watch it live and all that good stuff. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for being here, Tom. And we'll be back next week.